Hi everyone, thanks for being with me. It's Tony Tonkin here from the Child Protection Party. I want to talk about some key newspaper items, I guess, that came out over the last couple of days. And each of these items talks about Victoria in particular and how, in one instance, there has been some significant change, but in two other instances I'm going to talk about we are identifying further problems within the state of Victoria in relation to children that are in care. It's important for the Child Protection Party to ensure that, as best as we can, that the issues concerning children in care are highlighted and you're made aware of them. Now, these two cases that I'm going to be talking about, one in particular is a Children's Commissioner who's made some statements in relation to a report that's come out concerning Indigenous children in Victoria and the ongoing abuse that occurs to them. And another one is a case in which a woman now has sought damages for the time that she was in care. And I'll go through both of those in just a moment. But it's important to be able to understand, I think, that the system as lots of people experience it, as parents and children experience it, is damaging to many, many children. Now, I'm the first one to agree that there are occasions when children are in harm's way, living with their parents, and that there needs to be an intervention. The intervention, though, doesn't need to be one in which the children are always removed. In fact, on many occasions, I would suggest that working with the family, ensuring that the issues that the department has identified are managed and dealt with, is the most efficient, proficient and effective way of working through child protection issues. We've talked about that many times here on this program. But I'm going to talk now about a case that's happened in Victoria, and you can see by that this is actually Victorian Children's Commissioner urges action as new data shows ongoing sexual exploitation of children in care. Now, new data reveals Victoria's most vulnerable children in state residential care are continued to be harmed by organised and opportunist sexual exploitation. Almost 2 years after an inquiry by the Commission for Children and Young People made recommendations to the Victorian Government to tackle the scourge. Now, this scourge has been happening for a long, long time. Ever since, I guess, Federation, this scourge has been there. So to recognise that it's happening now and to still fail to do anything about it, I think is a travesty. And we need to make sure that that is addressed. We need to ensure that there are people in Parliament who will represent children appropriately and to encourage other politicians to take this matter seriously, and certainly to make those social workers and others who work in this field accountable for the decisions that they make. Victoria's Commissioner for Children and Young People, Liana Buchanan, said on Wednesday that it is clear that without strong action, children in residential care remain at extreme risk of harm due to criminal activity by adults. And some of these activities are about sexual assault on these children. Now, we must recognise the fact that many of these children are vulnerable children. They've come from often traumatic backgrounds. They're traumatised by simply being in care as well, and they don't have the supervision of these children that often a parent would offer. And they certainly don't have the nurturing that is often provided by parents. And as a result of that, they find themselves looking for affection, if you like, through other people who are able to manipulate them and often for their own gratification. In the lead up to next month's state budget, we are sharing this data to make clear the continuing consequences of underinvestment and limited action. It goes on to say, data released Wednesday, today, shows that from July 2021 to the end of March this year, 423 incidents of sexual exploitation in residential care were reported to the Commission, involving a total of 165 children. And the point I want to make about that is that there were probably many reports around a particular individual. So as those reports are made, one would have to wonder what action is taken in order to protect those children further. Because if there are 165 kids and there's 423 instances, then we can assume that there are multiple notifications. And therefore those children are not cared for appropriately, because clearly through those notifications the department would have known about the activities of these kids and who they are hanging around with. Of these, 64%, or 241 incidents involving sexual exploitation and abuse of children under 16, and 11 incidents involving 9 years and under 12. Involve 9 children, that is, under 12. Behind these figures are 165 of Victoria's most vulnerable and victimised children, children who have already suffered trauma, been removed from their families and now in the care of the state. Reports received by the Commission indicate perpetrators are targeting children in residential care and offering drugs and or money if the children leave care to meet up with them in cars, homes or hotels. Sexual abuse and assaults are common occurrences of these children. And if the department knows about these because they've received the notifications and are failing to act in an appropriate way, then one has to wonder, what are they doing? Why are they allowing these situations to occur with these children and failing to protect them appropriately, given that they've chosen to remove these children from their biological families because they deemed them to be at risk of harm? Now, clearly, they're at risk being in care with the government. So in what way are the government ensuring that these kids are cared for? It is obvious from this sort of data that they're not. That they don't actually care about these kids. These kids are viewed often as being the worst, of being lesser than, of not really being all that important until they grow up. And then, perhaps, as we'll demonstrate in just a moment, they might take action to sue the department for their behaviour. Now, it just goes on to say here, these children are compounded by for Aboriginal. These harms are compounded by for Aboriginal children and young people who remain overrepresented in residential care and the broader child protection system. The report found an alarming high number of children and young people who are absent or missing from residential care are sexually exploited, abused and assaulted, often by men. This exploitation, abuse and assault can continue over long periods and has devastating and long-term consequences. Now, and I didn't show you the data for that, but I will. This is where that report says just that. So it is here. So what this is saying is that the department knows about this issue, that they've failed to care for these kids, as I've just said, and that they're permitting, in effect, these assaults and this abuse of these vulnerable kids to continue. Now, I've often argued that if we were to provide a further system that acted as they did against parents, that is a system that made them accountable, that is the department accountable for their failures, then many of these kids would be removed from them. I don't know where they'd be placed, but the point is that as parents, they fail over and over and over again. And we as a society have to at some point say that we need to protect all kids, no matter who they are. They don't have to be our own, but we need to be caring enough about children and the well-being of children to take some form of action. And the best action you can take at the moment, I believe, is to join the Child Protection Party, become a part of what we're involved in so that all children can be adequately protected. The other story that I want to talk about is this one, which is about a young woman who has chosen to take the department to court and has been successful. So this is where a Melbourne woman placed in an abusive foster home receives a record $2.6 million payout. And there is a reason why this particular case is important. The primary reason I think it's important is that it is evident that if you've been in care and you were abused while in care, and I don't think it matters whether it's emotional, psychological, sexual abuse, even though one could argue that the sexual abuse is probably the most horrific of all of them. But if you've been in care and you've been abused in some form or another, and you know that the system knew about it, this is the key. If the system knew about it, that is, somebody was informing the system or notifying social workers or the department that a child was being abused that was in their care, and there's a record of that somewhere, which often there is, then it's an opportunity to take them to court. Now, I just want to stress the fact that this is an extreme case. It's the highest payout we know of for someone who was in care, but it's worth noting. This is absolutely worth noting. So it goes on to say, a Melbourne woman has been awarded $2.6 million in compensation for the abuse and neglect she suffered in Victoria's foster care system. She's a law graduate, was 2.5 months old when she was taken from her mother in an act designed to protect her from harm. Instead, she endured years of mistreatment at the hands of the foster family that eventually adopted her. So while she was with this foster family, she was later on adopted. The department knew while she was with the foster family what had been happening in the home. They chose to ignore that because at the end of the day it was easier and cheaper for them to become adopted parents of this child. That meant the department could abdicate their responsibility around the child, and it would no longer cost them money in order for the foster family to look after her. However, she continued to be abused while in this foster home. And I think this is because there were also other foster kids in the home that were a party to this abuse. There was sexual abuse, violence, neglect, emotional abuse, she said, of her time in their Melbourne home. There were basic human rights that were denied to her. Under Victorian Supreme Court settlement, the state government and the foster care agencies Ozchild and Uniting Victoria Tasmania will pay Amy a combined $2.6 million plus costs and apologise for her treatment. Amy has turned to equine therapy to help her cope with the mental health conditions caused by childhood punctuated with trauma. So she's taken up looking after horses in order to help her manage her PTSD. This includes severe PTSD, anxiety and depression, and eating disorder and dissociative disorder. She decided to sue the government and foster care agencies after she sought access to her documents. And this is my point. If you seek your documents and you have got notice within those documents that there are declarations in relation to how other people had viewed your care, or other notifications in there that indicated that you were being abused, then you probably have a reasonable case to take to court to seek some form of compensation. In the court documents, Amy detailed allegations of abuse ranging from having food withheld and being left unwashed to being sexually abused and forced to share a bed. She alleged over the years numerous notifications were made to the department and foster agencies about conditions in the home. And I guess it was because she'd identified them that was the reason why. And there's another reason why I think this payout is so high, and I'll go to that in a moment. The notifications include a letter written by Amy's biological mother when she was about a year old. And I can tell you that I have lots of cases where parents will say that the kids aren't being cared for. They've got lice in their hair, they've got scratches, and they've got bumps, and they've got some injuries that have occurred while in care, which probably wouldn't have happened, they believe, if they were in the parents' care. And so these are reasons, if those notifications, so anybody who has a child who's in care of the department, I use that word care loosely, but who is under a guardianship of the minister, then I would suggest that you always contact the report line, the child abuse report line here in South Australia, and let them know of the notifications, because later on in life, those notifications may be important if that child, as an adult, chooses to take the department to court. The Department of Human Services knew we were being abused, foster care knew we were being abused, our primary school knew we were being abused, family members knew we were being abused, friends knew we were being abused, she told the ABC. How do you rationalise that, knowing that all of your trauma, was completely avoidable. This is so true. She was very young when she was in care. So the reality is that any trauma she received, and I don't know the reasons why she was taken, but any trauma that she would have received, there would be none, or wouldn't be recognisable or identifiable because she was too young to remember it. And so all of the trauma this young woman experienced was while she was in care. So you can't use the argument that she was traumatised prior to going into care. She was only a baby at that time. So I think that's an important thing to note. If you've got, because the department will argue that if you've been in care, if you've been taken from your family, there is trauma, and you would have experienced that trauma. And certainly kids over the age of 3 probably would remember that. Younger than that, maybe not. It doesn't mean you don't have the emotional effects. I understand all of that. I'm not going to get into that. However, the trauma that this person received while in care was significant, given that she didn't have any trauma as a result of living with her biological family. But she would have had some trauma about being taken, that's for certain, and she had heaps and heaps of trauma while in care. At least one child had come out of the home and had said that he had been raped, Amy said. They knew this before they even placed me into the care of this family. The family also took in about 36 other children over the years Amy was in their care, in addition to their biological children. Amy was in nappies when the biological son of her foster parents, a boy on the verge of adulthood, began sexually abusing her. That sexual abuse continued even after he grew up and moved out. Amy said his foster mother was aware of what was going on. The $2.6 million, which several high-profile lawyers believe sets a record for award of the state payout, took into account lost future earnings as well as pain and suffering and medical expenses. Now, this is a point I want to make about this, is that Amy was fought against the odds. She educated herself at high school. She went on to university. She studied law. She did really well. Obviously, a very, very smart woman. And because of her potential earnings as a lawyer and the fact that now she can't work as a lawyer because of her anxiety, depression, her stress and her PTSD, which is caused by being in this abusive care situation, her potential earnings are taken into account. As you can imagine, as a lawyer, those earnings can be quite extensive, quite excessive. So that is one of the reasons, I think, why it's $2.6 million. Now, that doesn't mean that if you've got your case, and it doesn't matter whether you're educated or not, it doesn't matter, that you were abused in care deserves some sort of remuneration. End of story. And it's as simple as that. So if you've been in one of those situations or your kids have been in those situations, I would suggest that you contact a lawyer. But before you do all of that, I would encourage you to seek out as much information as you can, much of the documentation if you can, as when you were in care or your kids were in care, to find out whether there are notifications in there that would have indicated that you or the children were abused, and that the department would have known about it because it was in their documentation. Let me know what you think, and if you can, subscribe to this page if you're watching this on YouTube. And could you just remember that there's a video that we've put out last week, which is called Seeking Justice. It's a fabulous video. We're wanting to do more of those types of videos. If you've got something that has happened to you that you want to talk to us about and you'd be okay about doing an interview around it, let me know. We can block our faces, change voices, do some fancy stuff if you want to do it anonymously, that's fine. But let us know at admin@childprotection.party. Thanks everybody for being with me. Take care, look after yourselves and be safe.